Hello, Western Civ. Welcome to week 12. We're getting kind of close to the end, right? And we're moving along into an extremely important section in the modules on World War II. And, you know, World War II, like World War I, was a world war with global ramifications. And as you'll see, all those ideologies that I had you study, except for a few, which I didn't go over fascism as much, but we're learning about that. And we're going to continue to learn about that, which I'll go into more explanations in a little bit. Essentially, communism and fascism, just to say, is an outgrowth of nationalism, not socialism. Okay? I'm also going to explain a little bit more on that as well. So, a kind of ultra-nationalism, we see a crisis with capitalist democracies and people embracing other ideas, one to the left, communism and socialism, and to the right, far right-wing nationalism manifest into fascism. And I can't say enough how important it is for us to understand these two wars, to understand the context of the Cold War, which we'll cover, and then to understand the world in which we live now, and the way that the world is going. I mean, the war on terror is also it comes right out of the Cold War because of these wars, and you know, what we're seeing, and the reason why I also had you watch that podcast was Hitler a Socialist? I think some of you, I'm certain, may have misunderstood a little bit of my intent on that, or what my objectives are. You have to understand, this wasn't a debate if socialism was good or not. It actually had no discussion over the qualities, the downsides or the benefits or anything about socialism itself. It was a historical clarification about misinformation about history. I think that because of the nature of the podcast and because it was attacking people like Ben Shapiro, who are very popular, and Chowder, who is also popular, and D'Souza, I want to clarify. I wouldn't actually go out of my way to make videos to discredit those individuals or to have a debate about their politics. I had this to clarify on a very particular point, which is that Hitler was not a socialist, and he certainly was not a leftist. And that is something that's getting brought up now, because if you are involved in politics now, you're seeing that the word socialism is being brought up again. There is a clash between the idea of what it means to be a nationalist or an anti-nationalist. A lot of people are being called fascist by the left. A lot of people are being called socialist communists by the right. And a lot of people are not using these terms precisely. They're using them pejoratively. And it all comes down to the intellectual baggage of this time period that we're covering. And so what I'm hoping is that by these sections and me incorporating directly confronting some current trends that are trying to kind of rewrite history, that will just make us a cleaner. It'll make sure that we're not caught up in these stupid debates, to be called these actually dangerous rewriting of history. And then, you know, we can debate about fascism and socialism and liberal capitalist democracies and blah, 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 all on their own merit, right? Okay, we don't need to add in all this other garbage. That's my whole point, okay? And you know, also why I bring this up is when I was in Europe, I saw, so let me back up. I've been on the road since around August. I went to Iceland first, Denmark, Sweden, and Germany. And then I went into Thailand, and I went back for 2 months into the Netherlands, into Leiden. And then I traveled around there a little bit. I went to Belgium as well. And what I noticed is how conscious that many, especially the older generation, isn't it interesting, right, are of World War II. But even the younger generation, let me give you an example. I was in Frankfurt, Germany, and the buildings were very new. It's not the coolest looking part of Germany. Well, why are there so many new buildings compared to some of the older style that you see throughout the rest of that part of Europe? It's because the Allies carpet bombed Frankfurt. Frankfurt felt the results of the war, right? And there's some buildings that are being put up in Frankfurt that are trying to imitate the old style, to give a little quarter or a section to get Germans familiar with what it would have, what the area would have looked like had they not engaged in a war and had been carpet bombed. I was in Nijmegen, which is the town, one of the oldest cities in the Netherlands, to go see some friends there. And there's some really interesting older parts, but a lot of it is also new buildings. Well, why? Well, the Nazis occupied the Netherlands during World War II, by the way, and so the Allies, to try to win the war, also carpet bombed that area, and so all the old buildings were destroyed. And by the way, most of the Dutch know that they're not mad at the Allies for the bombing, but it still happened on their soil because they were under the Nazi occupation. So there's memorial sites and sites where all the bombs were dropped. And so it just really leaves you an impression like, wow, I mean, here's where you see the actual scars of war. And when I was in Leiden, I got to do a tour of a windmill with this older gentleman it's been in his family for generations. And he showed me all these metal parts that I, to be honest, wouldn't have been all that interested or impressed with. But what he tried to clarify with me what was impressive about all these parts, aside from the fact that they were important to whatever the functions they would be for the windmill, is that he had one of the few original metal parts for the windmill compared to any other windmills, because when the Nazis occupied the Netherlands and Leiden, they took all of the metal and melted it down for the war, and they stole it basically from the Dutch people. So his father, he told me, quickly buried and hid all of his metal parts as the Nazis were storming in, and he just got that basically out of the way. And then after the war, he was able to get those parts back. So we're talking about people very engaged with this history. And of course, if you have a Jewish friend or friends maybe that were Roma, / Gypsy, you're probably not going to know that a lot as much of those, or people who are leftist or whatever. Some Jehovah's Witnesses were also targeted by the Nazis. If you knew anybody who has family from that time period, then you would also have more of a fresh understanding about it. And of course, if you have relatives that fought in that war. But we in the United States, while our soldiers definitely felt the effects of the war, for the most part, we remained relatively unscathed compared to the rest of the world. And the ideologies that took place and the things that were going on there were not things that we experienced firsthand, unless we were involved, unless there was women or men that were involved in various aspects of the U.S. involvement there. But we still wouldn't have experienced it like the rest of Europe, if you understand what I'm saying. So I just want to clarify, I just want to put those little perspectives out there for us. And I also want to mention that it's important in this debate, is a lot of people found it hilarious in Germany that there's a rumor that Hitler took away all the guns. He didn't. He actually expanded gun rights. But he expanded them compared to what they were before. There was nothing like a Second Amendment. Obviously, Jews were not allowed. He didn't allow them to have guns. But the reason why Hitler came to power is not because he took away people's guns. It's because he took the reins of power, and enough people supported Hitler's ideas to make it resistance to him impossible. He actually targeted communists and had most of them arrested and killed. Jehovah's Witnesses, the disabled, Jews, massively. The Gypsy people, which would now prefer to be called Roma, by the way, Roma, and gays. So he did all this and didn't have a whole lot of resistance by the majority of the German people. That is the thing to keep in mind. Now, and so as we look at this and what happens, it's going to make more sense too on the sensitivities of the issues going on with the current EU and what the EU is, which we're going to get to before this class is over. So before we're done, you're going to really have a strong idea about why the world is the way it is, and especially Europe, because this class is on Western civilization, right? So I can teach World War II through my world history, Western Civ, or the U.S. perspective. But keep in mind that as Americans, we need to really zone in on the parts of the world where the wars were really directly happening, and that's all I'll say for that for now. There's so many things that I want to cover, so many things that I'm leaving out. I mean, we could do whole classes on whole sections on the Holocaust, on what was happening in Eastern Europe in the battles in what is called the Badlands or the Bloodlands. Stalin. I mean, there's just so many things, but this is a overall, a general cursory set of points that you're getting. So I'll end it there, and feel free to question me if you have it. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. All right.